We're not funding this circus. Your father and I have discussed it extensively, and we've decided we're not going to enable this ridiculous wedding. The whole thing is embarrassing to our family, and frankly, we think you're making a huge mistake. So consider this your notice, we're withdrawing all financial support effective immediately. You'll need to figure out your own arrangements. My mother's voice was cold and final as she delivered this announcement over the phone, 3 weeks before my scheduled wedding date. 3 weeks before the ceremony I'd been planning for 8 months, 3 weeks before the day I'd been dreaming about, 3 weeks before I was supposed to marry the man I loved. And she was canceling it. Not canceling her attendance, canceling the entire wedding by withdrawing the financial support she'd promised when we'd started planning, the support that had been the foundation for every vendor contract and venue booking and arrangement we'd made. I sat in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. My fiancé David was at work, unaware that his future mother-in-law was currently dismantling our wedding plans with clinical efficiency. "Mom, you can't just pull funding 3 weeks before the wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "We have contracts. We've made commitments to vendors based on the budget you agreed to help with. We've sent invitations. People have made travel arrangements, then you'll need to contact those vendors and cancel, or figure out how to pay them yourself," she interrupted. "Emma, your father and I have been very generous offering to contribute to this wedding at all, given our concerns about your relationship with David. But we're not going to continue supporting something we fundamentally disagree with." Their concerns about David. That was the real issue, though my mother was dressing it up as concern about the wedding being embarrassing or a circus. What she really meant was that David didn't meet their standards. He was a public school teacher from a working-class family, not the doctor or lawyer or executive they'd envisioned me marrying. He was kind and intelligent and loved me completely, but he didn't have the pedigree or earning potential my parents had decided their daughter deserved. "We've been together for 4 years, I said, frustration creeping into my voice now. "You've had 4 years to voice these concerns. Why are you doing this now, 3 weeks before the wedding?" "We've voiced our concerns repeatedly," my mother said, her tone suggesting I was being deliberately obtuse. "You've chosen to ignore them. We'd hoped you'd come to your senses before it got this far, but clearly you're determined to make this mistake. So we're withdrawing our support before we're complicit in it. So you're sabotaging my wedding to try to force me to break up with David. We're declining to fund a decision we believe is wrong. What you do with that information is up to you. But Emma, I'll be very clear. If you proceed with this wedding, you'll be doing it without our financial support and without our blessing. We won't be attending a ceremony we don't support." The threat was obvious: cancel the wedding and break up with David, or lose family support entirely. It was emotional blackmail dressed up as parental concern. Before I could respond, I heard my sister Claire's voice in the background at my mother's house. My mother must have had me on speakerphone. "Better luck next time, Emma," Claire called out cheerfully, clearly having listened to the entire conversation. "Maybe you'll make a better choice with the next guy." My sister, who'd always been the golden child while I was the one who disappointed our parents by not meeting their expectations. My sister, who'd married a wealthy investment banker with our parents' enthusiastic support and who never missed an opportunity to highlight my failures by comparison. "Understood," I said quietly, my voice eerily calm despite the rage and hurt I felt underneath. "I understand completely. Thank you for letting me know your position." I hung up before my mother could respond, before I said something I couldn't take back, before the tears that were threatening to fall actually started. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. My parents had canceled my wedding. 3 weeks before the ceremony, they'd pulled all financial support and announced they wouldn't attend if I proceeded anyway. And my sister had found it amusing enough to mock me about "better luck next time," like my relationship was a joke and my wedding was already doomed. When David got home that evening, I told him what had happened. His face went through several emotions: shock, anger, protectiveness, and finally determination. "We'll postpone," he said immediately. "Give us time to save money and plan a wedding we can afford on our own without their help. I'm not going to let your parents' manipulation force us into debt or make you give up the wedding you wanted." "Or," I said slowly, an idea forming even as I spoke, "we don't give them what they want. We don't postpone. We don't cancel. We get married anyway, on our original date, but we do it our way without them. Emma, we can't afford the wedding we planned without their contribution, so we change the plan. We cancel the expensive venue. And the catering and all the elaborate things that required their money. We get married at the courthouse with just a few close friends as witnesses. We use what we've already paid with our own money for a small celebration afterward. We get married on our original date, but we do it in a way that's actually about us getting married rather than about impressing our families. David looked at me carefully. Are you sure? You've been planning this wedding for months. You wanted your family there. Are you really okay with cutting them out? They cut themselves out, I said firmly. They made it clear they'd rather manipulate me into breaking up with you than support my happiness. So they don't get to be part of our happiness. David, I want to marry you. I want to start our life together. I don't want to give my parents the satisfaction of thinking their manipulation worked or wait around hoping they'll change their minds. Let's just do this, simple, honest, about us. We spent the next 3 weeks frantically reorganizing our wedding plans. We canceled the expensive venue and catering, forfeiting deposits but avoiding larger bills. We informed our guests of the change in plans, many of whom were shocked and sympathetic when we explained, vaguely, that there had been family complications. We arranged a courthouse ceremony with just our closest friends present. We booked a small private room at a restaurant we loved for a celebration dinner afterward with the 20 people who'd been most supportive of our relationship. It wasn't the wedding I'd originally planned. It was smaller, simpler, less conventional. But it was also more honest, a celebration that was actually about our marriage rather than about performing for family expectations. I didn't tell my parents about the change in plans. I didn't invite them to the courthouse ceremony. I didn't send them information about the small celebration afterward. They'd made clear they didn't support our marriage, so they didn't get to be part of it in any capacity. 3 days before our original wedding date, which was now our actual courthouse ceremony date, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, Emma, I hope you've come to your senses and canceled this wedding. Call me back so we can discuss your future plans. I deleted the voicemail without responding. On our wedding day, David and I got married at the courthouse with 8 friends present as witnesses. It was quick, informal, and surprisingly emotional. There was something powerful about choosing to commit to each other without family pressure or expectations, about building our life on our own terms. Our celebration dinner afterward was intimate and joyful, filled with people who actually supported our relationship rather than trying to sabotage it. That night, David and I checked into a nice hotel for a one-night honeymoon that was all we could afford with the money we'd saved from canceling the big wedding. It wasn't Bali or Europe or any of the elaborate honeymoons my mother had suggested. But it was ours, earned with our own money, celebrated without family strings attached. No regrets. David asked as we sat on the hotel room balcony looking at the city lights. No regrets, I confirmed. I'm married to you. That's what mattered. Everything else is just noise. What I didn't know that night was that our decision to get married anyway, to refuse to be manipulated by my parents' ultimatum, had enraged my mother in ways I hadn't anticipated. And what I especially didn't know was that the coming months would bring developments that would give me the opportunity to show my family exactly how it felt to be excluded from major life events by people who claimed to love you. But first, I had to actually build a life with David separate from my family's expectations. I had to prove to myself that choosing my husband over my parents' approval was the right decision. And I had to navigate the aftermath of getting married without telling my family it had happened. I went silent on social media, no wedding photos, no announcement, no information that would alert my parents to the fact that David and I had actually gotten married on our original date. Our friends who'd attended knew not to post publicly or tag us in anything. For all my family knew, we'd either postponed the wedding or broken up entirely. 2 weeks after our courthouse wedding, my mother called again. This time I answered, curious about what she'd say. Emma, we need to talk about your relationship with David, she started without preamble. Your father and I have been discussing it, and we think it would be best if you took a break from him for a while. Give yourself space to think clearly about whether this relationship is really what you want. I'm married to him, I said calmly, interrupting her manipulation attempt. Silence on the phone. Then, What? David and I got married 2 weeks ago. Courthouse ceremony, small celebration with friends, no family present since you'd made clear you didn't support our marriage. So we got married without you. You can't be serious. Emma, you didn't actually go through with that ridiculous wedding. I went through with marrying David, I corrected. The wedding was different from originally planned because you withdrew funding. But we're married. Legally, permanently married. Your manipulation didn't work. We were trying to protect you from a mistake. You were trying to control who I married based on your classist judgments about David not being wealthy or prestigious enough. That's not protection. That's manipulation. And I'm done being manipulated. Emma, you're making a terrible decision. I've made my decision. I'm married. This conversation is over. Don't contact me again unless you're prepared to actually respect my marriage and treat David with basic courtesy. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt clear and strong in a way I hadn't felt in years of trying to meet my parents' expectations. My mother tried calling back 4 times. I didn't answer. She sent texts that cycled through anger, manipulation, and fake concern. You've made a huge mistake. You're going to regret this. Call me back so we can fix this before it's too late. I blocked her number. I blocked my father's number. I blocked my sister Claire's number. I created clean separation from people who'd proven they valued control over my happiness. David and I settled into married life. We worked our jobs, him teaching high school English, me working as a marketing coordinator. We lived in our small apartment and cooked dinners together and built a life that was modest but genuinely ours. We were happy in ways that had nothing to do with wealth or status or meeting other people's expectations. 3 months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. We'd intended to wait a couple years before having children, but it also wasn't entirely surprising given that we were newlyweds not being particularly careful about prevention. When I saw the positive pregnancy test, I felt a complicated mix of emotions: excitement, fear, overwhelm, and underneath it all, a deep certainty that this baby was wanted and would be loved. I told David that evening. He was shocked, then excited, then thoughtful. Your parents are going to lose their minds when they find out they're going to be grandparents, he observed. They're not going to find out, I said firmly. At least not from us. We're not telling them. They made clear they don't support our marriage or respect our choices. They don't get to suddenly be involved in our lives because there's a baby. Emma, they're going to find out eventually. Eventually isn't the same as us telling them. If they find out through other people, fine. But we're not reaching out to people who treated us terribly just because there's a pregnancy. They forfeited their right to be involved when they tried to sabotage our wedding. David looked uncomfortable but ultimately agreed. We told close friends about the pregnancy but asked them not to post about it on social media where my family might see. We started preparing for parenthood, doctor's appointments, reading books, planning for a baby on a tight budget. I was 4 months pregnant when my mother found out. I don't know exactly how she heard, probably through mutual family friends or distant relatives who'd seen me at some public event where my pregnancy was visible. But she found out, and she immediately started trying to contact me. The blocked numbers changed to calls from unfamiliar numbers. Text messages from email addresses I didn't recognize. Eventually, my father tried calling from his office phone, a number I hadn't blocked because I hadn't known it. I answered that call without thinking, hearing his voice before I could hang up. Emma. Emma, please don't hang up. We heard you're pregnant. We need to talk about this. And that's where the real story begins. Because what my parents wanted to talk about was how they expected to be involved in their grandchild's life. And what I had to say in response was going to define family boundaries for years to come and prove that sometimes the best revenge is simply enforcing the same exclusion that people imposed on you. Stay with me. Because what happened when my family demanded access to my daughter after refusing to support my marriage is going to show you exactly why actions have consequences, and why people who exclude you from your joy don't get to be included in what comes after. Emma. Emma, please don't hang up. We heard you're pregnant. We need to talk about this. My father's voice coming through my phone was cautious but insistent, catching me off guard because I'd answered without checking the caller ID. I stood frozen in my apartment kitchen, hand on my small but visible baby bump, processing that my family had found out about the pregnancy and were now trying to force their way back into my life. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm pregnant. David and I are having a baby. That's not a family discussion, it's our private situation." "Emma, we're going to be grandparents," my father said, emotion creeping into his usually controlled voice. "We know things have been complicated between us, but a baby changes everything. We need to talk about how we're going to be involved in our grandchild's life." "You're not going to be involved," I interrupted, my clarity sudden and complete. "You made a choice when you tried to sabotage my wedding. You made clear you don't support my marriage or respect my choices. Those consequences don't disappear just because there's a baby now. That's not fair, Emma. Your mother and I may have made mistakes about the wedding, but we're still your parents and we're going to be this baby's grandparents. You can't just cut us out of something this important." "I can, actually. And I am. Dad, you had a chance to be part of my life and you chose control over connection. You tried to manipulate me into breaking up with David by canceling my wedding. When that didn't work, you've spent the past 7 months ignoring my existence. You don't get to suddenly demand access to my child just because being grandparents appeals to you. We weren't ignoring you, we were giving you space to come to your senses about that marriage," my father argued, his tone shifting to defensive. "We thought if we stepped back, you'd realize you'd made a mistake and come back to us for help fixing it. You thought if you punish me long enough, I'd leave my husband to get your approval back," I corrected, my voice cold now. "That's manipulation, not love. And it didn't work. I'm still married to David. I'm happy. We're having a baby together. And you're not part of that picture because you chose not to be. Your mother is devastated," my father said, switching tactics to try to trigger my guilt. "She's been crying since she heard about the pregnancy. She feels like she's being punished for trying to look out for your best interests. She's being held accountable for trying to sabotage my wedding," I interrupted. "There's a difference. And Dad, you can tell Mom that if she wanted to be involved in her grandchild's life, she should have supported her daughter's marriage. She made her choices. These are the consequences." "You're being incredibly selfish and cruel," my father said, anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. "Punishing your mother by keeping her from her grandchild. I'm protecting my child from people who've demonstrated they use family relationships as weapons for control," I said firmly. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just maintaining the boundaries you established when you decided I didn't meet your standards. We want to meet with you and David. Talk about this in person. Work out some arrangement where we can be part of the baby's life." "No. There's no arrangement. There's no negotiation. You're not going to be part of my daughter's life." I stopped, realizing I just accidentally revealed the baby's sex, something we hadn't been planning to share widely yet. "A granddaughter," my father said, his voice breaking slightly. "Emma, please. Don't do this. Don't keep us from knowing our granddaughter. We're sorry about the wedding. We made mistakes. But please don't punish an innocent baby by keeping her from her grandparents." "I'm not punishing my daughter. I'm protecting her from grandparents who've proven they'll use love as a bargaining chip and withdraw support when family members don't meet their expectations. That's not healthy grandparenting. That's toxic manipulation, and my daughter deserves better." "Emma," I hung up. Then I blocked that number too, closing another avenue for my parents to try to force contact. David came home from work an hour later to find me sitting on the couch, hands on my belly, still processing the conversation with my father. I told him what had happened, how they'd found out about the pregnancy, how my father had called demanding involvement, how I'd told them they wouldn't be part of our daughter's life. "Your father has a point about one thing," David said carefully, sitting beside me. "This isn't just about punishing your parents. Our daughter will grow up without grandparents on your side. Is that really what you want for her?" "She'll have your parents," I pointed out. David's mother and father had been supportive of our relationship from the beginning, had attended our courthouse wedding with joy and celebration, and had been thrilled about the pregnancy when we told them last month. "She will, and my parents are excited. But Emma, she'll also eventually ask about your parents. About why she doesn't know them or see them at holidays. What are we going to tell her? We'll tell her the truth in age-appropriate ways, I said. We'll tell her that her grandparents on my side made choices that hurt people, and that we decided to protect her by not including them in our lives. We'll tell her that sometimes loving someone means setting boundaries with people who can't treat you well, even if those people are family. And if she wants to meet them when she's older. When she's 18 and capable of making informed decisions about relationships, she can choose whether to have contact with them. But until then, I'm protecting her from people who've proven they're manipulative and conditional in their love. I won't expose her to that. David nodded slowly. I support whatever you decide. But I want to make sure you're making this choice from a healthy place, not just from hurt and anger about the wedding. It's not just about the wedding, I said. The wedding was the culmination of years of conditional love and impossible standards. My parents have always been critical and controlling. They've always had expectations I couldn't meet. The wedding was just the moment I realized that no matter what I did, they'd never actually accept me as I am, they'd only accept versions of me that met their standards. I don't want my daughter growing up with that same pressure. I don't want her to think love is something you have to earn by meeting other people's expectations. Then we protect her from that, David agreed, putting his arm around me. We build our own family with our own values. And if your parents eventually figure out how to respect boundaries and treat people well, maybe there's room for them someday. But that's their work to do, not yours. The calls from my parents continued for weeks, coming from different numbers each time they found a new way around my blocks. I stopped answering calls from unfamiliar numbers entirely, letting everything go to voicemail. The messages cycled through various manipulation tactics, from my mother, Emma, I'm your mother. You can't just cut me out of your life over one disagreement. I carried you for 9 months. You owe me at least the chance to know my grandchild. From my father, you're being vindictive and using your pregnancy as a weapon against us. This isn't about protecting your child, it's about punishing us. From my sister Claire, you're really going to deprive your daughter of her grandparents just because mom and dad didn't like your wedding plans? That's pretty petty, Emma. Grow up and forgive them already. I deleted all the messages without responding. I wasn't going to engage with people who thought I owed them access to my child or who characterized setting boundaries as punishment. Their inability to understand why their behavior had consequences wasn't my problem to fix. 6 months into my pregnancy, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I saw her through the peephole, standing in my hallway with bags that appeared to contain baby items, clearly planning to use gifts as a way to force contact. I didn't open the door. I called through it, Mom, I'm not letting you in. Please leave. Emma, I brought things for the baby. Just let me in for 5 minutes, no. I told you on the phone that you're not going to be part of my daughter's life. Showing up at my apartment with gifts doesn't change that. Please leave before I call building security. You're really going to stand there pregnant with my grandchild and tell me I can't even see you? You're really that heartless. I'm setting boundaries with someone who tried to sabotage my marriage and who's now trying to manipulate her way back into my life without actually acknowledging what she did wrong or respecting the consequences. Leave, Mom. Now. I heard her crying on the other side of the door, heard her setting the bags down in the hallway, heard her walking away. I waited 5 minutes to make sure she was actually gone, then opened the door and moved the bags inside to examine them later. The bags contained expensive baby items, designer clothes, high-end nursery decorations, elaborate toys for a newborn who wouldn't use them for months. All of it was exactly the kind of showy, expensive help my mother excelled at, gifts that were more about demonstrating her generosity than about actually meeting needs. I donated everything to a women's shelter that supported single mothers in crisis. My daughter didn't need expensive designer baby clothes from grandparents who couldn't demonstrate basic respect for her parents' marriage. David and I continued preparing for our daughter's arrival. We set up a simple nursery in our apartment's second bedroom with furniture from IKEA and hand-me-downs from friends. We took birthing classes and read parenting books and tried to wrap our minds around the reality that we were about to become parents. David's parents visited regularly, bringing practical help and genuine excitement, filling the grandparent role with love that wasn't conditional on us meeting their expectations. 3 weeks before my due date, my sister Claire somehow got David's cell phone number and called him directly while he was at work. He told me about the conversation that evening. Your sister basically tried to guilt me into convincing you to let your parents be involved with the baby. David explained. She said you're being cruel and vindictive, that I'm enabling your worst impulses, that I should be the reasonable one and talk sense into you about maintaining family relationships. What did you say? I told her that I support my wife's boundaries completely, that I think your parents behaved abhorrently during our wedding planning, and that I'm not interested in exposing our daughter to grandparents who tried to sabotage her parents' marriage. She called me several creative names and hung up. I'm sorry she dragged you into this, I said. I'm not. Emma, I want to make something very clear. I'm not just going along with your decision to keep your parents away because you're my wife and I support you. I'm actively agreeing with that decision because I witnessed how they treated you during the wedding planning. I saw how they tried to manipulate you into breaking up with me. I heard the way your mother talked about me like I was worthless because I'm a teacher instead of a lawyer. I don't want those people influencing our daughter. This isn't just your boundary, it's our boundary as parents. Hearing David affirm that he actually agreed with excluding my parents rather than just tolerating my decision was unexpectedly emotional. I'd been carrying some guilt about depriving our daughter of grandparents, worried that I was being too harsh or too unforgiving. But David's clear statement that he also thought my parents shouldn't be involved validated that I was protecting our family rather than just acting from hurt. 2 weeks before my due date, my father tried one final manipulation tactic. He sent a certified letter to our apartment, requiring a signature for delivery, that laid out his terms for reconciliation. Emma and David, we acknowledge that we made mistakes during your wedding planning. We handled the situation poorly and we're sorry for any hurt we caused. However, we believe we've been punished enough for those mistakes. You're about to bring our granddaughter into the world, and we think it's time to move past this conflict. We propose the following arrangement. We'll apologize formally to both of you in person, we'll commit to respecting your marriage going forward, and in exchange, we'll be allowed reasonable grandparent access to our grandchild, regular visits, holidays, important life events, etc. We think this is a fair compromise that allows everyone to move forward while still acknowledging past mistakes. Please contact us within the next week to schedule a meeting where we can finalize this arrangement before the baby arrives. We hope you'll be reasonable about this. Dad and Mom, I read the letter twice, analyzing every manipulative element, the framing of my boundaries as punishment, the expectation that an apology should automatically restore full access without earned trust, the demand that we respond within their timeline, the characterization of their conditional offer as a fair compromise. I drafted a response that same day. Dad and Mom, thank you for your letter. However, I'm not interested in the arrangement you've proposed. Here's why. You haven't actually apologized for trying to sabotage my wedding. You've acknowledged you handled the situation poorly, which minimizes what you actually did. Withdraw funding 3 weeks before the ceremony specifically to try to force me to break up with David, then refuse to attend when we got married anyway. You haven't demonstrated any behavior change or examination of why you thought sabotaging your daughter's wedding was acceptable. You've just decided enough time has passed that you should be forgiven. You're treating reconciliation as a transaction. We'll apologize, you'll give us access to the baby, rather than understanding that trust has to be rebuilt through demonstrated changed behavior over time. You're demanding a response within your timeline rather than respecting that I might need significantly more time and evidence of change before considering any contact. Most importantly, you're still framing this as being about what you want, access to your grandchild, rather than about what would actually be healthy for my family. So no. There's no arrangement. There's no negotiation. If you want any possibility of being part of my daughter's life eventually, you need to actually examine why you behaved the way you did, demonstrate genuine changed behavior over years rather than months, and respect boundaries without making demands or setting timelines. That's work you need to do on your own, without any guarantee that it will result in the access you want. In the meantime, David and I are preparing to welcome our daughter without your involvement. We're at peace with that decision. Emma, I sent the letter via email to both my parents and copied my sister, wanting to make sure they all understood clearly that there would be no last-minute reconciliation before the baby's arrival. My mother's response came within hours. You're being unreasonable and cruel. We're trying to make amends and you're spitting in our faces. Don't be surprised if you live to regret this decision." I blocked the email address and didn't respond. 1 week later, our daughter Lily was born after a relatively straightforward labor and delivery. David was with me throughout, and his parents visited the hospital briefly to meet their granddaughter while respecting our need for rest and bonding time. We didn't announce the birth on social media. We didn't send out birth announcements. We told close friends in David's family, but we kept the information contained to people we trusted not to pass it along to my parents. For 3 blissful days, we existed in our small hospital room bubble with our perfect, healthy daughter, learning to be parents without any family drama or manipulation. And then, on day 4, my mother found out Lily had been born. And what happened next would test exactly how far she was willing to go to force her way into our lives, and how far I was willing to go to protect my daughter from grandparents who'd proven love was conditional on meeting their expectations. We were home from the hospital for exactly 2 days when my mother showed up at our apartment again. David and I were in the exhausted, overwhelmed phase of new parenthood, trying to figure out feeding schedules and diaper changes and how to function on 2-hour sleep increments. Lily was 4 days old, tiny and perfect and requiring all our attention. The knock on the door came at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. David was at school. He'd taken only 3 days of leave before needing to return to work, and I was alone with Lily, who'd finally fallen asleep after a difficult morning of cluster feeding. I checked the peephole and felt my stomach drop. My mother was standing in the hallway again, this time with my father beside her. They looked determined and entitled, clearly planning to force a confrontation. I didn't open the door. I kept my voice low so I wouldn't wake Lily. "Please leave. I told you that you're not welcome here." "Emma, we know the baby was born," my mother said, her voice carrying through the door. "We have a right to meet our granddaughter. You can't keep her from us indefinitely." "I can, actually. And I am. Leave before I call the police for trespassing." "We're not trespassing, we're trying to see our grandchild," my father said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "Emma, be reasonable. We just want to meet her. 5 minutes. That's all we're asking." "You're asking for access to my daughter after trying to sabotage my marriage and spending months refusing to respect my boundaries. The answer is no. Leave now." "We'll go to a lawyer," my mother said, anger sharpening her voice now. "We'll file for grandparents' rights. We'll force a legal arrangement if you won't be reasonable. Grandparents' rights don't apply when grandparents have no existing relationship with the child," I said, having researched this exact scenario during my pregnancy. "You've never met Lily. You have no established relationship to protect legally. Any lawyer you consult will tell you that you have no case. You're making a huge mistake," my father said. "Emma, someday you're going to regret this. I regret that my daughter has grandparents who think love is something to be used as a weapon for control. Now leave, or I'm calling 911 to report harassment." I heard them arguing in the hallway, my mother's voice raised, my father trying to calm her down. Eventually I heard footsteps walking away and the elevator doors opening and closing. I watched through the peephole to make sure they'd actually left before allowing myself to breathe. Lily slept through the entire confrontation, blissfully unaware that her grandparents had just tried to force their way into meeting her. I sat beside her bassinet, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath, feeling fiercely protective in a way I'd never experienced before. This was my daughter. Mine and David's. And I would move mountains to protect her from people who thought family relationships were transactions to be negotiated rather than bonds to be honored through consistent love and respect. That evening, when David came home, I told him what had happened. His face went tight with anger. "They came here while you were alone with a newborn. They tried to force their way in. They did. And they threatened legal action for grandparents' rights. Can they do that?" "Not successfully. I checked with the family lawyer I consulted during my pregnancy. Since they have no existing relationship with Lily and since we're both her fit, married parents making joint decisions about her welfare, they have no legal standing to force access. Their threat was empty, just another manipulation tactic." "We need to move," David said suddenly. "I know that's a huge thing to do with a newborn, but Emma, I don't want them knowing where we live. I don't want random appearances where they try to force contact or take photos or whatever other escalating behavior they might attempt. He was right. As long as my parents knew our address, they could keep showing up unannounced, keep creating situations where we had to deal with confrontations, keep trying to force their way into Lily's life. Can we afford to move? I asked practically. We just had a baby. I was on unpaid maternity leave. Money was tight. We'll make it work. I'd rather have a smaller apartment farther from my school than worry about your parents showing up every time I'm not home. Let's start looking this week. We began apartment hunting that weekend, looking for places in different neighborhoods from where we currently lived, places my parents wouldn't know about or think to look. We found a smaller but cheaper apartment about 30 minutes away from our current place, farther from David's school but in a building with better security and in a location my parents would have no reason to visit. We moved when Lily was 3 weeks old, accomplishing the move during one of David's school breaks with help from his parents and a few close friends. We didn't tell my family we were moving. We didn't give them any forwarding information. We simply disappeared from the address they knew, making it impossible for them to show up unannounced anymore. For 2 months, we existed in peaceful obscurity. No surprise visits. No harassment. No manipulation attempts. Just us learning to be parents to Lily, navigating the exhausting beautiful chaos of life with a newborn, building our small family without toxic interference. Then social media betrayed us. One of David's co-workers posted a photo from a school event that included David in the background, tagged him without asking permission, and inadvertently included geolocation data that showed the school's location. From there, it wouldn't be hard for determined people to narrow down our likely neighborhood based on where David worked. My mother found us again when Lily was 3 months old. Different apartment building, different neighborhood, but the same determined entitlement. This time she brought Claire with her, apparently thinking my sister's presence would somehow make the visit more acceptable. I saw them through the new apartment's peephole and didn't even bother engaging. I just called building security and reported unwanted visitors who were harassing my apartment. Security escorted my mother and sister out of the building with a warning that repeated visits would result in a formal trespass notice. My mother called from the parking lot, her voice shrill with outrage when I made the mistake of answering an unfamiliar number. You called security on your own mother? You had me escorted out like a criminal. Emma, how dare you? How dare I protect my family from people who don't respect boundaries? I interrupted. You were told multiple times that you're not welcome. You keep showing up anyway. That's harassment. And I'll treat it as such every single time. I just want to meet my granddaughter. You wanted to meet her on your terms without doing any of the work of actually changing your behavior or respecting my boundaries. That's not how this works. Stop showing up at my home. Stop trying to force contact. If you do it again, I'll file for a formal restraining order. I hung up and blocked another number. Then I met with the building management to ensure my parents' names were on a list of people who should never be allowed access to our floor, even if they claimed to be visiting. The harassment took a new form after that. Since they couldn't access us physically, my parents started trying to reach us through third parties. Distant relatives I barely knew started calling to tell me that my parents were devastated and that I was being cruel by keeping them from their granddaughter. Family friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to say they'd heard about the family rift and wanted to help mediate. Each time, I gave the same response: this isn't a family rift. This is me setting boundaries with parents who tried to sabotage my wedding and who refused to respect my decisions as an adult. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't something that requires mediation. It requires my parents to respect my boundaries and stop attempting contact. Most people backed off after that explanation. A few persisted, clearly having heard a very different version of events from my parents where they were innocent victims of their unreasonable daughter. I blocked those people too. When Lily was 6 months old, my mother tried a new tactic. She sent a gift to David's school addressed to him, clearly hoping he'd be more sympathetic than I was to attempts at contact. The gift was an elaborate photo album filled with pictures of me as a child, captioned with messages like, "Your daughter deserves to know her heritage," and "Don't let Emma's anger deprive Lily of family history." David brought the photo album home and we looked through it together. My mother had carefully curated the photos to show only happy family moments, birthday parties, holidays, vacations, with no evidence of the conditional love and constant criticism that had defined my actual childhood. It was revisionist history, an attempt to create a narrative where she'd been a loving mother rather than someone who'd used love as leverage for control. "What do you want to do with this?" David asked, handling the album like it might explode. "Keep some of the photos for Lily if she ever wants them," I decided. "But not with my mother's manipulative captions. I'll scan the photos and save them in a file Lily can access when she's older if she's curious about family history. But I'm not keeping this album that's designed to guilt me into contact." I scanned the photos, removed them from the album, and donated the empty album to a charity shop. Then I sent the original photos back to my mother with a note: "Please stop sending items to David's workplace. If you continue attempting contact through third parties or his workplace, we will pursue legal action for harassment." The attempts at contact slowed after that but didn't stop entirely. Birthday cards for Lily arrived at David's parents' house. My mother had apparently figured out that we might pick up mail there occasionally. Holiday gifts appeared on our doorstep with no return address but obvious origin. Each time, I documented the attempt, saved any evidence, and prepared for the possibility that we'd eventually need a formal restraining order. When Lily was 9 months old and starting to be more interactive and aware, I started to worry about accidental contact. What if we ran into my parents at a grocery store or park? What if they approached us in public and Lily was old enough to be confused or frightened by strangers claiming to be family? What if their escalating behavior reached a point where they tried to take Lily from me in a public place? I consulted again with the family lawyer. We drafted a formal cease and desist letter outlining every attempted contact over the past 9 months, documenting the pattern of harassment, and making clear that any further contact attempts would result in immediate application for a restraining order. The letter was sent via certified mail to both my parents and to my sister Claire, since she'd participated in some of the harassment attempts. We received confirmation they'd all signed for and received the letters. For 3 weeks, there was blissful silence. No calls, no visits, no gifts, no attempts at third-party contact. I allowed myself to hope that maybe the legal letter had finally made them understand we were serious. Then my sister Claire did something that crossed a line even I hadn't anticipated. She created a fake social media account using a combination of old photos of me and AI-generated images, pretending to be me, and began posting about regretting my decision to cut off my family and wanting to reconcile with my parents. I discovered it when a former college friend I hadn't spoken to in years contacted me saying she was glad I was working things out with my family and congratulating me on being mature enough to forgive them. Confused, I asked what she was talking about and she sent me a link to the fake account. The account had been active for 2 weeks and had dozens of posts, all carefully crafted to make it look like I was slowly coming around to the idea of letting my parents back into my life. There were posts about missing family, about realizing holding grudges hurts everyone, about wanting Lily to know her grandparents. Each post was written in a way that mimicked my writing style just enough to be convincing. My sister had created an entire false narrative of reconciliation and was using it to tell extended family and mutual friends that I was ready to reconnect with my parents. It was identity theft, defamation, and an escalation of harassment that moved from annoying to actually illegal. I took screenshots of everything on the fake account. I reported it to the social media platform for impersonation. I sent all the evidence to my lawyer. And then I did something I'd been avoiding because it felt too aggressive. I filed for a formal restraining order against my mother, father, and sister, citing months of documented harassment culminating in identity theft and defamation. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, the restraining order was granted on a temporary basis, legally requiring my parents and sister to stay away from us and cease all forms of contact. What happened at that court hearing, and what my parents said when forced to explain their behavior to a judge, would determine whether they'd ever have any possibility of being part of Lily's life, or whether they'd permanently proven they were too dangerous to trust near her. The temporary restraining order was served to my parents and sister 1 week before the scheduled court hearing. According to the process server's report, my mother had reacted with dramatic shock and my father with cold anger, while Claire had apparently tried to argue that she'd done nothing wrong and the fake social media account was just trying to help our family reconcile. The week before the hearing, I received a series of letters from all three of them, sent before the restraining order went into effect, presumably attempting to sway me into dropping the legal action. I saved all the letters unopened as evidence but didn't read them. My lawyer advised me to document everything but not to engage with any content that might be designed to manipulate my emotional state before testifying in court. The morning of the hearing, David took the day off work and his parents came to our apartment to watch Lily. I dressed in professional clothes, gathered all my documented evidence, and met my lawyer at the courthouse with the kind of nervous determination you feel when you're about to confront people who've spent your entire life making you doubt your own perception of reality. The hearing was in family court, a smaller and less formal setting than criminal court but still intimidating with its official procedures and serious consequences. My parents and Claire were already there with their lawyer, an expensive-looking attorney who my parents had clearly paid significant money to hire. Seeing them in person for the first time in over a year was jarring. My mother looked older and tired, her usual polished appearance slightly worn. My father looked stern and defensive. Claire looked angry and self-righteous, clearly convinced she'd done nothing wrong. The hearing began with the judge reviewing the temporary restraining order and the documented evidence I'd submitted, the timeline of attempted contact after I'd requested none, the gifts and letters sent after being told to stop, the appearance at our home after being warned away, the fake social media account with screenshots and platform confirmation of impersonation. My lawyer presented the case methodically, framing it not as a family dispute but as a pattern of harassment and stalking behavior that had escalated over time despite repeated clear requests to cease contact. Then my parents' lawyer presented their side. Their argument was, unsurprisingly, that this was a tragic family misunderstanding, that my parents were loving grandparents being cruelly denied access to their grandchild, and that all their attempts at contact were reasonable efforts to maintain family relationships rather than harassment. Your Honor, their lawyer said in practiced sympathetic tones, my clients are devastated by this situation. They made a mistake regarding their daughter's wedding, they'll admit that freely, but they've been trying to make amends for over a year and have been met with nothing but hostility and rejection. All they want is the opportunity to know their granddaughter. Surely that's not unreasonable? The judge looked skeptical. Counselor, I'm looking at a documented pattern of contact attempts after being explicitly told to cease contact. I'm looking at evidence that your clients appeared at the petitioner's home multiple times after being told they weren't welcome. And I'm particularly concerned about this social media account. Creating a fake account impersonating someone is identity theft, which is a criminal matter. How do your clients justify that behavior? My sister's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, my client Ms. Claire Thompson created that account out of concern for her sister's well-being. She believed that Emma was isolating herself from family due to postpartum depression or other mental health issues, and she was trying to facilitate communication that might help reconnect the family. Her intentions were good even if her methods were misguided. Your client committed identity theft and defamation, the judge said flatly. Claiming good intentions doesn't make that legal. And frankly, if Ms. Thompson was genuinely concerned about her sister's mental health, the appropriate action would have been to contact mental health services or make a wellness check request through proper channels, not to impersonate her sister online and spread false information. The judge turned to me. Ms. Chen, I'd like to hear your perspective on this situation. Can you explain the context that led to you seeking this restraining order? I took a breath and spoke clearly, having rehearsed this with my lawyer. Your Honor, my parents attempted to sabotage my wedding by withdrawing all financial support 3 weeks before the ceremony, specifically trying to force me to break up with my now husband because they didn't approve of his career or background. When I married him anyway at a courthouse ceremony, they reacted with anger rather than support. I made clear at that time that I wanted no contact with family members who tried to sabotage my marriage. When I became pregnant several months later and they found out, they immediately began attempting contact, not to apologize or examine their behavior, but to demand access to my child. I repeatedly told them that I was maintaining boundaries and that they were not welcome to contact me or be part of my daughter's life. They ignored every request to cease contact. Over the course of my daughter's first year of life, they appeared at our home unannounced multiple times, sent gifts and letters after being told to stop, attempted contact through third parties, and eventually my sister created a fake social media account impersonating me to spread false information that I was ready to reconcile when I wasn't. Every action escalated the harassment despite increasingly clear communication that contact was unwanted. And Your Honor, this isn't about punishing my parents for one mistake. This is about protecting my daughter from grandparents who've demonstrated they'll use any tactic, manipulation, harassment, identity theft, to get what they want without respecting boundaries. That's not healthy grandparenting. That's obsessive control behavior. And I don't trust them near my daughter. The judge nodded and turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to hear directly from you. Why did you continue attempting contact when your daughter had explicitly told you to stop? My mother spoke up, her voice emotional but calculated. Your Honor, Emma is our daughter. We made a mistake about her wedding, we'll admit that. We were wrong to withdraw support the way we did. But we've been trying to apologize for over a year and she won't even let us speak to her. We just want the chance to meet our granddaughter and be part of her life. We're not dangerous people. We're just grandparents who want to know our grandchild. Your grandparents who committed identity theft when other harassment methods didn't work, the judge corrected sharply. Mrs. Thompson, I'm looking at evidence that you appeared at your daughter's home after being explicitly told you weren't welcome, that you sent gifts after being told to stop, that you attempted to access your daughter through her husband's workplace. And then when all of that didn't work, your other daughter created a fake social media account. This isn't trying to apologize. This is a pattern of escalating harassment. We were desperate, my father said, speaking for the first time. Your Honor, Emma is our only daughter. Lily is our only grandchild. We made a mistake with the wedding, but we've been completely cut off for over a year with no opportunity to make amends. What were we supposed to do? Just accept never seeing our granddaughter? You were supposed to respect your daughter's boundaries, the judge said firmly. Mr. Thompson, your daughter is an adult. She's a married mother making decisions about her child's welfare. You don't have a right to access her or her child just because you're related. And when someone tells you clearly and repeatedly that they don't want contact, the appropriate response is to respect that boundary, not to escalate into harassment and identity theft. The judge reviewed the evidence again, then made her ruling. I'm granting the restraining order for a period of 3 years, renewable if harassment continues. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson and Ms. Claire Thompson are ordered to have no contact with Emma Chin or her husband David Chin, no phone calls, no letters, no gifts, no third-party contact, no social media contact, and no physical proximity. If they violate this order, they'll be subject to immediate arrest and potential criminal charges. Additionally, I'm recommending that Ms. Claire Thompson be investigated by appropriate authorities for identity theft and defamation related to the fake social media account. That's a criminal matter beyond the scope of this civil restraining order. My mother began crying. My father looked furious. Claire stood up shouting that this was unfair and unreasonable, earning a sharp rebuke from the judge about courtroom behavior. I felt relief. Clear, uncomplicated relief. A judge, an objective third party with no emotional investment in our family dynamics, had heard all the evidence and confirmed what I'd known all along. My parents' behavior was harassment, not reasonable attempts at family connection. I wasn't being unreasonable or cruel. I was protecting my family from people who demonstrated they couldn't respect boundaries. After the hearing, my lawyer walked with me to my car. That went as well as we could have hoped, she said. The 3-year order gives you significant protection, and the criminal referral for your sister adds another layer of consequences for their behavior. How are you feeling? Validated, I said honestly. I've spent so long wondering if I was being too harsh or too unforgiving. Hearing a judge confirm that their behavior was actually harassment, that helped more than I expected. You protected your daughter from people who'd proven they're not safe to be around her, my lawyer affirmed. That's good parenting, not cruelty. Remember that if you start to doubt yourself. I drove home to find Lily playing with David's parents, happy and completely unaware that her other grandparents had just been legally ordered to stay away from her. I held my daughter close, breathing in her baby smell, feeling fiercely grateful that I'd had the strength to protect her from people who thought love was something to be weaponized for control. That night, after Lily was asleep and David's parents had gone home, David and I sat together on our couch processing what had happened. 3 years, David said thoughtfully. That takes Lily to age 4. By the time the restraining order expires, she'll be old enough to have some awareness of who people are. If it expires, I correct it. The order said it's renewable if harassment continues. And honestly, I don't trust that they'll leave us alone even with a legal order in place. They've proven they'll ignore boundaries. A piece of paper might not change that. But now they face arrest if they violate it, David pointed out. That's a different consequence than you just telling them to go away. They might actually respect it. We'll see. But David, even if they completely comply with the restraining order for 3 years, even if they never attempt contact again, I'm not sure I'd ever be comfortable with them having access to Lily. They've proven who they are. People don't change that fundamentally. That's your decision to make, David said. I'll support whatever boundaries you need. But I also think you should be open to the possibility that maybe this legal action was the wake-up call they needed. Maybe facing real consequences will force them to actually examine their behavior in ways guilt-tripping and manipulation tactics never could. Maybe, I said, though I was skeptical. But examination of behavior isn't the same as actual change. And I'm not exposing Lily to them again unless they can demonstrate years of sustained behavioral change, not just words about understanding their mistakes. The months after the restraining order were peaceful in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. No unexpected visitors. No harassment through third parties. No manipulative gifts or letters. Just our small family living our lives without toxic interference. Lily grew from a baby to a toddler, walking, talking, developing her personality. She knew David's parents as Grandma and Grandpa, had warm relationships with them, experienced what healthy grandparenting looked like. She had no idea that other grandparents existed, and we didn't volunteer that information. When Lily was 2 years old, David's mother asked gently whether I'd thought about what we'd tell Lily about my parents when she was old enough to ask questions. I'll tell her the truth in age-appropriate ways, I said. I'll explain that I have parents who made choices that weren't healthy, and that to protect her, we made the decision not to include them in our lives. When she's older, if she wants to know more details, we'll share them. And when she's 18 and capable of making informed decisions, if she wants to attempt contact with them, that'll be her choice. But until then, I'm protecting her from people who've proven they use relationships as weapons for control. That seems reasonable, David's mother agreed. I just want to make sure you've thought it through, because she will ask eventually. Children are curious about family. I know. And I'm prepared to answer honestly without bashing my parents or making her feel like she's missing something important. She'll understand that not all families look the same, and that protecting people you love sometimes means setting boundaries with people who can't treat you well. 3 years after the restraining order was granted, when Lily was 4 years old and starting to understand family relationships, I received a letter from my mother. It had been sent to my lawyer's office rather than to my home, respecting the restraining order terms that prohibited direct contact but using the one channel that was technically legal for communication about the order itself. The letter was long and handwritten, and my lawyer forwarded it to me with a note. This doesn't violate the restraining order since it was sent through proper legal channels. Whether you choose to read it is entirely up to you. I sat with the letter for 3 days before opening it. When I finally did, I found something I hadn't expected, actual accountability. Emma, I'm writing through your attorney because the restraining order prohibits direct contact, but I need you to know that I've spent the past 3 years in intensive therapy working on understanding why I behaved the way I did regarding your wedding and your daughter. My therapist has helped me see that I've been controlling and manipulative throughout your entire life, not out of love, but out of fear that if you made choices I didn't approve of, it would reflect badly on me. I sabotaged your wedding because David didn't meet my standards for what I wanted your husband to be. I harassed you about Lily because I wanted the appearance of being a grandmother without doing the work of actually examining why you'd cut me off. The restraining order was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to stop trying to manipulate my way back into your life and actually confront my own behavior. I've learned that I have patterns of conditional love and control that damaged you throughout your childhood, and that my actions during your wedding and afterward were just continuations of those lifelong patterns. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to let me back into your life. I'm writing because my therapist says part of accountability is acknowledging harm without expecting anything in return, so that's what I'm doing. I harmed you. I tried to sabotage your marriage. I harassed you during your pregnancy and your daughter's infancy. I participated in my other daughter's identity theft. I was wrong about all of it. And I'm sorry. I'm also writing to tell you that I won't contest renewal of the restraining order when it comes up for review. You were right to get it. You were right to protect Lily from me. I wasn't safe to be around her because I hadn't done the work of becoming a healthy person. I'm working on that now, but that work is for me, not to earn my way back into your life. If Lily ever asks about me when she's older, please tell her the truth, that her grandmother made serious mistakes and that her mother protected her by setting boundaries. Tell her I'm working on being better, even though that work came too late to be part of her life. Tell her she deserves grandparents who love without conditions, and I'm sorry I couldn't be that person when it mattered. I hope you're happy, Emma. I hope David is good to you. I hope Lily grows up knowing she's loved completely, without having to earn it by meeting impossible standards. That's what you deserved from me and never got. I'm glad you're giving it to your daughter. With genuine remorse, Mom, I read the letter 3 times, analyzing it for manipulation or hidden agendas. It seemed genuine. Accountable in specific ways. Acknowledging not just the recent harassment but the lifetime of conditional love that had preceded it. Not asking for anything in return. I showed it to David. What do you think? I asked. Is this real change or just more manipulation? I think it's real accountability, David said thoughtfully. Which doesn't mean you have to respond or change your boundaries. But Emma, this is what you said you'd need to see: specific acknowledgement of harm, therapeutic work on patterns, respect for boundaries, no demands for access. She's giving you all of that. 3 years ago, when the restraining order was granted, I said I'd need to see years of demonstrated changed behavior before considering any contact, I reminded him. The letter is good, but it's still just words. I need to see what she does, not just what she writes. That's fair. You don't owe her anything just because she finally did the bare minimum of examining her behavior. But you also don't have to close the door permanently if you think someday there might be space for limited contact. I thought about it for weeks. Eventually, I drafted a response that I sent through my lawyer. Mom, I received your letter. I appreciate the accountability in it and the acknowledgement that the restraining order was appropriate. That's more honest than anything you've said in the past. I'm not ready to have contact with you, and I don't know if I ever will be. The damage you caused over decades isn't fixed by one letter, no matter how thoughtful. But I'm glad you're in therapy and working on yourself. That's important work regardless of whether it leads to any relationship with me. If you want any possibility of meeting Lily someday, here's what would be required. Years more of demonstrated changed behavior, evidence that you've actually internalized these insights rather than just intellectually understanding them, respect for whatever boundaries I set even if they feel harsh to you, and acceptance that any relationship would be on my terms with no guarantees. I'm not promising anything. But I'm also not saying never. What I'm saying is, keep doing your work, respect the boundaries, and maybe in several more years we can reassess. Emma, I sent the letter and then tried to let go of expectations about how my mother would respond. I'd said what I needed to say. Whether she could actually sustain the growth she described in her letter over years rather than months would determine if there was ever any possibility of reconnecting. 5 years after my mother canceled my wedding, 4 years after Lily's birth, I'm living a life that's happy and full and completely separate from the family that spent my childhood teaching me that love was conditional on meeting their standards. Lily is a joyful, confident 4-year-old who knows her grandparents, David's parents, as loving and supportive, who has no idea that other grandparents exist somewhere who once tried to force their way into her life. My mother has respected the boundaries I set. She sends 1 letter per year through my attorney, brief updates on her therapy progress, acknowledgements that she's not asking for contact, expressions of hope that I'm well. She doesn't demand anything. She doesn't guilt trip. She just stays in her lane while doing the work of becoming better. I don't know if I'll ever let her meet Lily. I don't know if the demonstrated change is deep enough to trust. But I do know that I protected my daughter from toxic family patterns, that I chose my husband over my parents' approval, and that I built a life of genuine connection rather than conditional acceptance. And sometimes, when people ask if I regret cutting off my family over wedding drama, I think about that circus comment, "We're not funding the circus," and I smile. Because they were right about one thing, life with them was a circus of manipulation and conditional love. And the best thing I ever did was close the ticket booth and stop letting clowns into my show. For anyone watching who's been excluded, manipulated, or controlled by family, you're allowed to protect yourself and your children from people who can't love you without conditions. You're allowed to set boundaries that others consider harsh. You're allowed to choose peace over performance. And you're allowed to let people experience the same exclusion from your joy that they imposed on you. Sometimes the best response to "we're not funding this circus" is simply, "the circus is already full." Thanks for watching. Drop a comment if you've ever had to set difficult boundaries with family who couldn't respect your choices. Subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself, protecting your children, and building lives based on genuine love rather than conditional acceptance.